Today at the United States Supreme Court, justices heard oral arguments about Idaho's near-total abortion ban in the United States versus Idaho and Moyle. Two consolidated cases where the Department of Justice claims that Idaho's abortion law, with exceptions only for rape, incest, and the life of the mother, they believe it violates the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. But let's recap how we got to Supreme Court arguments. Back in the year 2020, Idaho passed a trigger law, Senate Bill 1385, which said if the United States Supreme Court ever overturned Roe v. Wade, Idaho would immediately make abortion a crime. Well, that happened in June of 2022. So performing an abortion is a felony for doctors in Idaho, and it's punishable with up to 5 years in prison and a permanent loss of a license for more than one offense. Idaho's law was triggered and went into effect specifically in August 2022. Almost immediately, President Joe Biden's Department of Justice filed a lawsuit because they believe Idaho's law conflicted with federal EMTALA rules. And EMTALA is a federal law, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. And the argument is that it requires doctors to stabilize or treat any patient who shows up at an emergency room, including an abortion if needed. The DOJ argues that Idaho's law doesn't allow for that for pregnant women that need an abortion. They say there's a gray area. They say a patient, though, should not be denied care because they aren't dying yet. A federal judge immediately put an injunction in place later on, and about a year later, that injunction was suspended by a three-judge panel on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They said Idaho could enforce all of its abortion ban, even emergency care, while the lawsuit works its way through the courts, which is what it's doing right now. Back in January, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear arguments in the United States versus Idaho. And here we are today, Idaho's big day at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Legal counsel for the Gem State, they defended the law, and the DOJ, they're challenging it. So Idaho says that the law is clean and constitutional and should be allowed to be fully in place. They argue there is an exception in Idaho law for an abortion if it is necessary to save the life of a pregnant woman. Critics, meanwhile, say that doctors do not have a clear answer on when to take action according to the law. And we heard from major Idaho players from both sides of the courtroom on the topic following arguments this morning. They could not be more diametrically opposed. Center stage at the United States Supreme Court. Idaho's laws on abortion, specifically arguments over the interaction between EMTALA and state law in emergency situations. Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador was at the Supreme Court today. He spoke shortly after arguments ended about the interaction between EMTALA and Idaho law.
EMTALA says nothing about abortion. In fact, EMTALA requires that emergency rooms care for pregnant women and their unborn children. And under Idaho's law, doctors are expected to treat women facing life-threatening situations, as well as women experiencing ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages.
Idaho is in the house! Yes!
Idaho minority leaders, Representative Alana Rubel and Senator Melissa Wintrow, traveled to D.C. to speak out on the issue. They believe it is important that both sides from Idaho share perspective. They say the reality is that doctors are leaving Idaho because of this conflict.
It is awkward to come to terms with the fact that the law that they championed has caused complete disaster to the state of Idaho. And it's much more convenient for them to just say, oh, la, 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 this isn't happening. Nobody else is telling the truth. But facts are facts, numbers are numbers, and they can only run from it so far.
Supreme Court justices listened to extended arguments from each side. They will rule on the interaction of EMTALA and Idaho law later this year. But for now, a major debate centers on the story that Idaho women are being airlifted out of the state for care. Just this week, we heard from Dr. Jim Souza, the chief medical officer for St. Luke's Health.
So we've had 6 just in the first trimester, ironically, of this year. Since January, the first 4 months of this year, we've had 6 versus 1 in all of 2023. If I annualize it, I tell myself we'll be at somewhere between 15 and 20 by the end of the year.
Standing in the shadow of the Supreme Court, AG Labrador was asked about that exact stat.
What's telling is that they never said that under oath. Once again, all the examples that they're using under oath are examples that are covered by Idaho law, but they're going to the press and they're making all these statements that are clearly misinformation, in my opinion. In fact, I have talked to doctors in the ER, the same ER rooms that they're talking about, and they are telling me that they have no idea what this administrator is talking about.
I believe the doctors. and they would not be making that up. The medical director, I think it was St. Luke's that said that. He's not going to make that up.
I know some of these doctors, they're not making this up. I know the doctors that are leaving the state and that are saying, that these are not invented stories. And the notion that, every doctor in the state is lying, every hospital in the state is lying, you should just believe us, there's no problem, is not a credible position for them to take. It is pure gaslighting and nothing but. And I understand this is an inconvenient truth for them.
So I have asked emergency room doctors what this is all about, because I want to be informed about what's happening in Idaho. And they're saying that they don't know what this is about. So I would like to get some more information on this. In my opinion, if somebody's being transferred out of the state of Idaho whose life is in jeopardy, that actually doesn't conform with their practice and the things that they're supposed to be as doctors. So I would hate to think that St. Luke's or any other hospital is trying to do something like this just to make a political statement.
Labrador argues that Idaho's law is clear with the exception. Rubel and Wintro say they've heard firsthand that it's not clear, and that because of it, there are major consequences.
If it could lead to jeopardy of the life of the mother, there's no immediacy in our law. It just says that it could lead to the death of a mother, then our law allows abortion in those cases.
You're hearing the things they're saying, not believing doctors, physicians aren't leaving, and that's just not true. This is basic counting, right? We can count the number of doctors who've left our state. We can talk to medical facilities that cannot recruit a physician into our state.
So the Supreme Court's ruling on this whole question and really on the arguments, it'll likely have implications for abortion laws in other states. Boise Mayor Lauren McLean also had something to say about the arguments. In a statement today, she said in part, "Let me be clear. We should all be free to make our own decisions privately and with our doctors about our bodies, lives, and futures. Physicians need to be able to provide the emergency health care they have been trained and taken an oath to do." She goes on to say that nobody should have to travel to another state for medical care they need, and yet that's what's happening because we are losing healthcare providers in emergencies can't be treated here, end quote from Mayor McLean. By the way, the United States Supreme Court, they will likely have a decision on this later on in the summer, probably June. We will keep you posted.